Greetings to all of you in Madison. I am very sorry I can't be with you in person. Unfortunately, the discussions to fund the federal government through the rest of this fiscal year are at an impasse as I record this. What happens now depends on whether the House majority will bend to the wishes of their most extreme members or accept the compromise they first agreed to. Your dinner theme tonight, dialogue and unity, could not be more appropriate or timely. In our capitals here in Wisconsin and in Washington, D.C., there's not much dialogue these days, and even less unity. More of both would go a long way toward resolving some of our biggest challenges. My dictionary defined dialogue as an exchange of ideas or opinions on a particular issue, especially a political or religious issue, with a view to reaching an amicable agreement or settlement. The Conflict Information Consortium, or CIC, at the University of Colorado Boulder, further explains that dialogue is a process in which parties engage in deep and meaningful conversations with their opponents, not for the purpose of resolving a dispute, as is usually true with negotiation or mediation, but rather with the purpose of developing a better understanding of the people on the other side. Through dialogue, the CIC tells us, we break down negative stereotypes, focus on deep-rooted feelings and values and needs, and come to understand the complexity of the conflict and the issues on all sides. So dialogue is not just about talking at each other, it requires listening to each other, grasping both the content of what is being said and its context to gain understanding. Now, I'm not an expert on conflict resolution, but to reach an amicable agreement or settlement, it seems to me both parties need to be working towards the same goal. No matter whether you're ending an unhappy marriage or achieving peace in the Middle East, understand that the effect of that resolution on each party may differ, but know that the goal must be in common and clear. Resolution begins and grows and ends on common ground. In Congress, I seek ways to work with colleagues from across the aisle. This isn't just a courtesy, it's a necessity if one wants to get things done. Let me give you an example from my own experience working with a colleague whose views couldn't be more different than my own. That's Dr. Tom Price of Georgia. He is one of the most conservative members of Congress. Most of the time when Tom votes one way on a bill, I'm voting the other way. But for several years, Tom and I teamed up to try to solve one of our country's most seemingly insoluble problems. How do you ensure access to health care for all Americans? Now, Tom and I had totally different ideas on how to go about doing that. But the key to our collaboration was that we shared the same goal, and we sat down together to try to figure out a way to achieve it. Don't think that there weren't problems. On more than one occasion, the task seemed too great, and our differences too large to overcome. But we stayed committed to our goal. Our dialogue continued, and after more than a year of intense discussions, we produced a bipartisan bill that gave states the charge of ensuring health care for all, with leeway to utilize the strategy best suited for each state. Neither of us got all that we wanted. The key to our collaboration was that to achieve our common goal, we were willing to make compromises to get there. My efforts with Tom were supplanted by the health care reform law that we enacted last year, a law that I supported and Tom did not. But I still consider our joint effort successful in that it proved that through honest and open dialogue, unity can be achieved, even between two very different points of view. Beside a common goal, key elements that must be shared by parties in a dialogue are the understanding of each other's language and culture. What we say and how we say it may be interpreted far differently than we intended by a listener whose language or culture different from our own. Sometimes the results are amusing, but there's always the risk of causing harm to ourselves and others. On the lighter side, take the story of the American Peace Corps volunteer from New York City who was sent to live in a small town in Africa. On her first visit to the local post office there, she approached the postmaster and asked for stamps. What she got was a lecture on her rudeness for being so direct, followed by instruction on the long and personal greetings expected in the local culture. In her new home, the rule was always greet first. After 2 years in Africa, the woman returned to New York City for a visit and again stopped by a post office. She stood in a rapidly moving, efficient line. When it was her turn at the counter, she said to the postmaster, "Hi, how are you?" The postmaster said, "Fine," and then the woman asked, "How is everyone in your family?" The postmaster said, "What?" To which she replied, "Well, how is your work?" Then the postmaster said in the way only a New Yorker can, "Lady, do you want to buy stamps or have a conversation?" Two post offices, two very different cultures, and a good story to tell to friends. But suppose the stakes had been higher. Take this example, again from the CIC. In international diplomacy, cultural differences can sometimes mean that signals are missed, which cause delays and missed opportunities. In the early days of U.S.-China reconciliation, a researcher points out that U.S. observers entirely missed one of the most significant Chinese signals of reconciliation of all in the 1970-71 period. In October 1970, Chairman Mao invited an American author and journalist to stand next to him atop the Gate of Heavenly Peace. To American diplomats, this gesture seemed so unimportant. They didn't bother to respond. To the Chinese, the invitation was a very important signal, worthy of a significant response. This lack of cultural understanding on the part of the Americans did nothing to foster the reconciliation they sought, and may have delayed it. Language differences, too, can have a negative impact on cultural understanding and dialogue. As a friend of mine learned the hard way, there's a big difference in France when shopping for a matelas, a mattress, and a matelot, a sailor. Differences in language extend further than words, to tone and body language. A simple gesture in one culture can be a great insult in another. There's so much to learn about each other and from each other if we only try. For many years, immigrants to this country went so far to assimilate and gain acceptance that they suppressed or lost much of their rich heritage and culture. We now know how much diversity enriches our lives. None of us checks our life experiences at the door when we show up. We bring those life experiences with us always. Whoever we are, we can affect change because we prioritize issues as we know them and as we understand them. And because of that, having a seat at the table matters. Let me give you another example that occurred at the very beginning of my political life. In my first year in office as a person serving on the Madison City Council, I recall a debate that served as a light bulb moment for me on the difference it makes to have women involved in policy making. The council was debating the question of whether to add and pay for a new bus route to the then brand new Madison Area Technical College campus on the far east side of Madison. As the debate started, I heard much of what you might expect. Finger pointing. Why didn't MATC include this in their budget? Why are they coming to the city at the 11th hour? And I remember then hearing a woman's voice. She spoke of how frightening it is to walk down a dimly lit street at night. Then I heard another woman's voice. She talked about how many of the evening classes are attended by women who have to juggle day jobs and family responsibilities. These women offered perspectives based on their own life experience that would not have otherwise been a part of this debate. And I'm convinced it was the women on the council who turned the debate that evening and led to the approval of the new route. So having a seat at the table matters substantively. And if you happen to be the first woman elected to Congress from Wisconsin, the first Hispanic appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court, the first African American elected president, or a renowned heart surgeon, author, and TV personality whose parents immigrated to the United States from Turkey, you know it also matters just as much symbolically. It may change the hopes and aspirations of a young person who, by seeing you in your position, is able to see herself or himself there. Intercultural understanding is essential if we are to bridge the gaps that divide us. That is why the efforts of the Turkish American Cultural Foundation and the Niagara Foundation are so important. Learning about each other is one benefit. Dialogue can also lead to friendships that enrich our lives forever. Again, drawing from the CIC. In her essay, Same and Different, Crossing Boundaries of Color, Cultural, Sexual Preference, Disability, and Age, author Letty Cotton Pogrebin said that cross-cultural friendships are usually formed, like any friendship, around shared interests or characteristics. But she cautions that while such friendships form around the appearance of sameness, the individuals are never quite the same. She acknowledges the importance of feeling both the same and different, and says that friends need not transcend race or ethnicity, but can embrace differences and be enriched by them. Back in the early 1980s, when I was in college, I took a class called Infinitesimal Calculus. In this class, our professor assigned us insoluble problems as homework. Now, we weren't expected to come up with the answers, but we were expected to show some progress. The point was that by pushing against the boundaries of what we knew, we could expand those boundaries. Now, I never figured out any of those problems. There's a reason I became a politician and not a mathematician. But as my career has progressed, I've thought back to that class many times. Far too often, our greatest challenges are portrayed as insoluble problems. And our reaction is to throw up our hands and say, oh well, and go on to the next challenge. But history teaches us that even our biggest problems have solutions. How do you measure the area of a circle? How do you govern without a king or a queen? How do you put a man on the moon? All insoluble problems, or so they seemed at one time. If we are to solve some of the world's most seemingly insoluble problems, famine, drought, sickness, oppression, and the unending quest for peace, we must foster dialogue with common purpose. And if we are to create that dialogue, we must first develop and nurture cultural understanding and respect for one another. That understanding and mutual respect comes from the commitment of individuals such as yourselves who seek a better, more understanding, and more peaceful world. I thank you for that commitment. Teşekkür ederiz, my friends. Thank you very much.